You are very familiar with point of view at this point. You've explored it and analyzed it for many years by now. But with drama, we're going to introduce a few new point of view devices. So things that playwrights use to help communicate different things about a character. So if we look at point of view for drama, again, like we just said, it can help us understand a character in a different way than in another work of fiction. They can also, these point of view devices can also create dramatic irony. Don't worry if you haven't looked at the irony PowerPoint yet. We'll talk about it. So the devices that we're going to take a look at are monologue, soliloquy, aside, and narration. We're going to look at similarities and differences between some of them, and we are going to look at examples. So this is going to take a little bit longer because we're going to look at the clips within this video to help you get a better understanding. But what you want to take a look at is the device and what it does. So a monologue, if you look at the beginning, mono means one, right? And log is words like we have with dialogue, where you have people interacting. But monologue is a speech by one character to the other characters. So it's one person talking for a lengthy bit of time compared to what they might typically be doing if they're interacting with characters. But the intention is that the other characters can hear the monologue. It's meant to be heard by them. The character giving the monologue is actually talking to them. Whoops, sorry. A soliloquy is, again, it's a speech by one character, but it's not said to other characters. It's not meant for other characters to hear. It's meant for the audience to hear. With a soliloquy, it is lengthy like a monologue. It's like a long speech, but the character is really talking to himself or herself. It's not intended that anyone else hear it, but the audience does, because we are privy to things that the other characters are not privy to. An aside is a statement or like a brief bit of talking that the audience can hear but is not heard by other characters. It can be said directly to the audience. It might not be said directly to the audience, but it is meant for the audience to hear and not the other characters. So other characters are present during an aside, but they don't hear the character say the aside. The audience does. And then a narration is it's like what you might see as like a voice over in a movie or a television show. It's words that the narrator is saying. So the narrator is separate. Is separate from the story. They're like outside the story, and they kind of speak over the story that's happening on stage. So monologue and soliloquy, we kind of said the similarities and differences. We have one character speaking, giving a speech. Monologue, though, the character intends to be heard by the other characters. In a soliloquy, the character does not intend to be heard. You can kind of think of the difference as like the soliloquy is the character thinking out loud through that speech, but the monologue, the character is actually giving a speech because they intend for it to be heard. Okay, so aside, we started talking about this already also, but an aside comes into play because typically in a drama, you have dialogue telling the story. So you have characters talking to each other to tell the story. You are often unable to show what a character is thinking. You might do it through a soliloquy, but a soliloquy is lengthy. The playwright might not want to have a character go on and on about what they are thinking and feeling. If they want it to just be a quick, short comment to show what the character is thinking, they use an aside. Again, sometimes it's said directly to the audience, sometimes it's not. The character is like saying it to themselves. but the audience can hear it. So it's, and like a soliloquy, an aside is meant only for the audience to hear. And it allows the character to kind of comment on what's happening with another character or what's happening in the play. So again, we talked about the differences a little bit, the soliloquy versus aside and the similarities. Here's another quick like breakdown of it. Take a minute to look at it. Press pause if you need to. And then we're going to move on to narration. So again, like we talked about, narration is where you have a character who is not involved in the action of the story, giving information about what's happening. So like we said, in a movie or a TV show, it might be voiceover, but it's a person separate from the action that is going on in the drama. Okay, so here we have an example of a monologue. Give yourself a second, remind yourself what a monologue is, pause if you need to. So this character is going to give a speech that he intends for other characters to hear.
Medicine without a license. It's a very grave charge, son. Are you aware that it's unlawful to practice medicine without a medical license?
Yes, sir, I am.
Are you aware that running a medical clinic without the proper licensing can place both you and the public in a great deal of danger?
Is a home a clinic, sir?
If you are admitting patients and treating them, physical location is irrelevant.
Yes, sir. Will you define treatment for me?
Yes, treatment would be defined as the care of a patient seeking medical attention. Have you been treating patients, Mr. Adams?
Well, sir, I live with several people. They come and go as they please. I offer them whatever help I can.
Mr. Adams, have
So
you or
far
have
we've
you not
had-
been treating patients at your ranch?
So far we've had dialogue. We have characters like speaking to each other and responding to each other. The monologue is coming up.
Everyone who comes to the ranch is a patient, yes. And every person who comes to the ranch is also a doctor.
I'm sorry.
Every person who comes to the ranch is in need of some form of physical or mental health. They're patients. But also every person who comes to the ranch is in charge of taking care of someone else. Whether it's cooking for them, cleaning them, or even a simple task as listening. That makes them doctors. I use that term broadly, gentlemen, but is not a doctor someone who helps someone else? When did the term doctor get treated with such reverence as, oh, right this way, Dr. Smith, or, excuse me, Dr. Scholes, what wonderful foot pads, or, pardon me, Dr. Patterson, but your flatulence has no odor. At what point in history did a doctor become more than a trusted and learned friend who visited and treated the ill? Now, you ask me if I've been practicing medicine. Well, if this means opening your door to those in need, those in pain, caring for them, listening to them, applying a cold cloth until a fever breaks, if this is practicing medicine, if this is treating a patient, then I am guilty as charged, sir.
Did you consider the ramifications of your actions? What if one of your patients had died?
What's wrong with death, sir? What are we so mortally afraid of? Why can't we treat death with a certain amount of humanity and dignity and decency and, God forbid, maybe even humor? Death is not the enemy, gentlemen. If we're going to fight a disease, let's fight one of the most terrible diseases of all, indifference. Now, I've sat in your schools and heard people lecture on transference and professional distance. Transference is inevitable, sir. Every human being has an impact on another. Why don't we want that in a patient-doctor relationship? That's why I've listened to your teachings and I believe they're wrong. A doctor's mission should be not just to prevent death, but also to improve the quality of life. That's why you treat a disease, you win, you lose. You treat a person, I guarantee you'll win no matter what the outcome.
Okay, so in that scene, we had a monologue, a speech by the character played by Robin Williams. He's trying to communicate information about his beliefs to the other characters. He wants them to hear him. And we, as the audience, get an understanding about his character. We get some information that can help us develop the theme. And we get some information about some of the conflict that's been going on. Okay, so we have our soliloquy example. Take a minute to remind yourself what a soliloquy is. So, a soliloquy is when a character is saying something lengthy, like a speech, but we can think of it, instead of as giving a speech, we can think about it as thinking to themselves. So, soliloquy is the character is thinking or speaking to themselves. They do not intend for anyone else to hear it, but we are the audience and we're special, so we hear it.
We're going to put a dent in the universe. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. How's that?
So we have a character here who is he's really talking to himself about what he believes about those people. Do not confuse with narration. We are hearing words over other actions, but the person who is talking is part of the plot. They're part of the action. So they are not separate from the story. So it's not, even though we are hearing words over other scenes, other characters' actions, it is not narration, because the character who is speaking is part of the story. Okay, so let's take a look at an aside. Remind yourself what an aside is. We got to skip around a little bit to get to the aside, but an aside Okay, so an aside, the character, if you didn't remind yourself, or if you did remind yourself and you want to double check, an aside is where the character says something to himself or herself, or directly to the audience, depending, but it is not intended for anyone else to hear. In this particular example of an aside, we do have the character talking directly to the audience.
Ready. No, Danny, these cue cards must be larger in size, okay? This is the Tonight Show. Get it together. The cue cards must be right. They are the live vests in this ocean of televised late-night jokery.
Last looks?
Last looks are the final touch-up before the show. Even the finest furniture needs a good polish every once in a while.
Mr. Fallon, you have a phone call?
A phone call is when someone calls you on the phone. Hello?
So you can see you have a character who is